Hi again. I want to talk to you today about the Jubilee. The Year of Jubilee is a biblical event that God ordained for the Israelites when they were in the land of Israel. It's outlined in Leviticus 25, and then we'll look a little bit further into the ideas behind the Jubilee. If we look at Leviticus 25, start at verse 1 here. The Lord spoke to Moses on Sinai and said, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land," so this is specifying when they come into the land, the promised land of Israel, which the Israelites went into, "which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord." The land shall keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. And this Sabbath is for the land. The land will keep a Sabbath. So this is a Sabbath for the Lord. And you shall neither sow in your field nor prune your vineyard. And this is a Sabbath for the land, a year of rest for the land. So verse 5, "And that which grows on its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, neither gather the grapes of your vine undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you and for your servant, and for your maid, and your hired servant, and for the stranger that sojourns with you. And for your cattle, and for the beast that are in your land, shall all the increase thereof be meat." So this is a little clearer in the NIV. I'll read the NIV version. Verse 6, it says, "Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself." So whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year, that is what their food was supposed to be in the land of Israel. Your manservant, your maidservant, your hired worker, and all those living among you. And as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land, whatever the land produces may be eaten. So let's go back to the King James here, and we'll start at verse 8. It says, "And you shall number 7 Sabbaths of years unto you." 7 times 7 years, that's 49 years. "And the space of the 7 Sabbaths shall be unto you 49 years. So there's a period of 7 Sabbaths, 7 of these 7-year periods. Each of those 7-year periods has a Sabbath year in the 7th year, but 7 of those is what this is talking about, and they add up to 49 years. "Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the Day of Atonement," that's Yom Kippur, "shall you make the trumpet sound throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year." Okay, so they were supposed to blow the trumpet after the 49 years, because remember, Yom Kippur is after Rosh Hashanah. Right after Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, on the 10th day of the month, Yom Kippur is always 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. So in that day, they were supposed to blow the trumpet throughout their land, which is the 50th year, because the 49th year just ended, and Rosh Hashanah is already come and gone, and so it's Yom Kippur of the 50th year. "And you shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you. And you shall return every man unto his possession, and shall return every man unto his family." Now remember, the Israelites, they all owned part of the land. Families owned land according to their tribes, and the tribes had land allotted to them in the land of Israel. That land was returned to them. That possession, their possession was their land. That was returned to them at the end of the 50 years, at the 50th year, the year of Jubilee. "A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. And you shall not sow nor reap that which grows of itself in it, nor gather the grapes of it of your vine undressed." So this is an additional Sabbath It happens on every 50th year, because otherwise this would be a double statement. Some people think it's talking about the 49th year, and that, this is the 49th year Jubilee. No, then it would be useless to state this. This is talking about the 50th year. It says, in the 50th year, you shall not sow nor reap that which grows into itself. That's the 50th year. Okay, so that's an additional Sabbath year that happens after the 49th year's Jubilee. Because after the 49th year, that's when they're supposed to blow the trumpet on the Day of Atonement, which is after Rosh Hashanah. And in the 10th day of the 7th month, and that's the 50th year. You shall hallow the 50th year. And remember, there was just a Sabbath year in the 49th year, because that was the 7th year of a 7-year period. So a Jubilee, that 50th year, shall be to you, and you shall not sow or reap, and it's another Sabbath for the land. All those 7-year periods were all those Sabbaths was for the land, the 7th year where they would not sow. For it is a Jubilee, it shall be holy unto you, and you shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. In the year of Jubilee, you shall return every man unto his possession. In other words, whatever land a person owned, they got to return to it. And if you sell to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy of your neighbor, and according to the number of years of the fruits, he shall sell unto you. Now, this is a really important factor, because this tells us something. The land of Israel was given as a possession to the Israelites. That land was given to them, and it was theirs. That land belonged to the Israelites, and each family had a possession that was theirs. For generation upon generation, that was theirs. That land got returned to them at the Jubilee. If they had to sell their land within a 50-year period, they would sell it according to how many years were left before the Jubilee, because they were going to get their land back. So this tells you something about God. God was all for what we would call free enterprise, because you could go ahead and sell your land, but you notice how God wouldn't let you fall into poverty either. He would let you get your land back. There was always a redemption that was available because of the year of Jubilee. The owner of the land could get their land back, and the family could keep their possession, their inheritance that was given to them by God. So they never lost their inheritance. Their inheritance was never lost to them. The family could also redeem their possession before the year of Jubilee. So you see here that God wanted fair selling of the land. He wanted it to be fair, because he said, according to the number of years after the Jubilee, shall you buy from your neighbor. In other words, you're going to buy some of the land of your neighbor. It's going to be according to how many years of use you're going to have on that land. Then verse 16, according to the multitude of years, you shall increase the price thereof. In other words, God's behind fair pricing. He's not behind the idea of people purchasing and making a huge profit and taking advantage of someone else. That's not God's idea. Now, God's idea is that you have a fair price. The price shall be according to the multitude of years. And according to the fewness of years, you shall diminish the price of it. For according to the number of years, the fruits do you sell. So the fruit of the land is according to the number of years you have it. This tells us another interesting thing. It tells us that the whole idea that we have in America, where it's gone overboard, where the people who have all the money, they buy the land and they've got it for good. It's theirs. Once they buy it, it's theirs, and they become powerful because they own businesses and lands. And people in the United States of America, they become corrupt because of their power, because they purchased so much and they own so much, and they never have to give that back because they own it. God was not behind the idea of people oppressing like that, because God knew that was going to happen. If somebody owned all the land, everyone would have to pay the person who owned the land, and they would be forever in debt. And that was not God's idea. So socialism was never God's idea. because that's what happens. That's how socialism comes into being, is when people get very rich and buy all the land, and everyone ends up paying the people who own the land. That's socialism. That's the person who owns it is in full control, and everyone else is in slavery to that owner. And that is socialism. Free enterprise is anyone is able to run a business, start a business. You can borrow the money to start a business, and then you can become rich. That's free enterprise, and that's God's idea. God is behind that idea. If you look at how he gave them all their possessions, they had a choice of how to run their land. They could reap and sow and work their land smart and make more than enough to provide for their family, and they could be rich. They could become rich like Abraham became rich. They could just deal wisely and observe the Lord's ways. And if they did that, the land would cooperate with them and they would become rich, because the curse of the law would not come upon them. And I've talked about the curse of the law many times before, but the idea being, if you're not under the curse of the law, you are rich. You are rich, because what's the blessing of the law? You're blessed in the city, blessed in the country. Everything you put your hand to prospers. You have abundant prosperity. God's idea is free enterprise. Socialism is not God's idea. Okay, this shows it plainly here, because God doesn't want someone to hold on to land, just buy up land because they have a lot of money and then it's theirs forever. God didn't let that happen to the Israelites. He did not allow that. He said that this possession belonged to the families, to the tribes. Each tribe had their own land, and then within that tribe, each family had an inheritance, and they could keep their inheritance. Every 50 years, it was given back to them if they sold it, even. So if they did come on hard times and oppression, and they sold some of their land, they would definitely get it back at the Jubilee year. Because verse 17 is what God is concerned about. You shall not, therefore, oppress one another. Because oppression comes through money, through purchasing, through power, through purchasing. Taking over someone's land, and then you're in control. God doesn't want people controlling other people. He wants us to be free. And he shows us that right here. That through the Jubilee year, God shows us this. You shall therefore not oppress one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God, the Lord your God. And he gave them the law. Why? So that they'd be free from the curse of the law. The curse of the law is oppression. And God was trying to keep them free from oppression. So if you do my statutes and keep my judgments and do them, you shall dwell in the land in safety. That's what we read in Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 to 14, where it talks about if you fully obey the Lord your God, these blessings will come upon you. And the land shall yield her fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and dwell therein in safety. And if you say, what shall we eat the 7th year? Behold, we shall not sow nor gather in our increase. In other words, every 7 years, they're not going to be sowing, so what are they going to eat? And here we see that God says, then I will command my blessing upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth fruit for 3 years. Now, notice that all the other years, they are only concerned about, taking care of themselves for the next year until the next harvest. But in the 6th year, it brings forth fruit for 3 years, not for 2 years, not just to cover the Sabbath year, but for 3 years. And you think about that for a minute. They're covered for the next year by the harvest of the previous year. And then it's the following year. The year they didn't sow is when they would have the problem of not having the harvest. And not just that year, but the year after it as well was covered by the 6th year. God would command his blessing upon the 6th year, and it would bring forth fruit for 3 years. Why is that? Because the Jubilee year, it happens once every 50 years. The 50th year was an extra year. That was a 3rd year. So there would be 2 Sabbath years back to back. And that's why there was provision for 3 years in every 6th year. And notice it was every 6th year, so there's always extra. They were always going to bring in extra. And then on that 50th year, they'd be provided for in that extra Sabbath year. But all the other years, there'd be extra provision. Because it says about the 7-year period, what shall we eat in the 7th year? What shall we eat? So they're talking about the 7th year, the year that of the Sabbath year of the 7 years, not the Jubilee year. They're talking about that year, and they're saying, well, what shall we eat then? And he's saying that the blessing will come on them in the 6th year, the year before that, and it shall give fruit for 3 years. So that covers even the year of Jubilee. They're covered. And you shall sow in the 8th year and eat of the old fruit until the 9th year. So notice that even when they sowed in the 8th year, yet they shall eat of the old fruit until the 9th year. They had 3 years worth of provision from the 6th year. So they were always provided for. They always had extra. God always has more than enough. God is the God who is El Shaddai, more than enough. He's more than enough. And so you shall sow in the 8th year and eat of the fruit until the fruits come in, you shall eat of the old store. The land shall not be sold forever. The land is mine. So you notice that the land belongs to God. The land of Israel has never belonged to anyone except God. That's his land. The land is mine. You think that's true of any other land in the world? God created the whole world, so really all the land is his. But he's showing Israel as an example for the rest of us, for the land of Israel. He's talking to the Israelites. It shall not be sold forever. In other words, when you sell land, it's not for good. It's every 50 years it's redeemed to those whose inheritance it is. For the land is mine, and you are strangers and sojourners with me. So the Israelites were strangers, even though that land was theirs and God gave it to them. They were supposed to see that land as being God's, and he gave it to them. So that inheritance that he gave each family was not going to ever go away. And in all the land of your possession, you shall grant a redemption for the land. So this is the land of their possession, and they each possessed according to their families and their tribes. If your brother waxes poor and has sold away some of his possession, and if any of his kin come to redeem it, then shall he redeem that which his brother sold. So in other words, if a member of a family had to sell some land because they waxed poor, because they came under the curse of the law for whatever reason, and they had to sell away some of their possession, and their kin, their family, their kin, they could redeem it for that family member, for that brother. And if the man have none to redeem it, and himself is able to redeem it, then he shall count off the years of sale thereof, and restore the overplus unto the man to whom he sold it, and he may return to his possession. In other words, if you ever had the money to buy back the land that is yours, you could always redeem it from the person who bought it. You could always buy it back. You had the right to do that. In other words, God was never going to let you lose your land if you had the ability to get it back before the Jubilee. God would allow you to get it back. But if he's not able to restore it to him, then that which sold shall remain in the land of him that he has brought it until the year of Jubilee. So until the year of Jubilee, that would belong to the person who bought it, and then they'd have to give it back to whoever owned it. And the sale would have been according to the number of years until the year of Jubilee. And in the year of Jubilee it shall go out, and he shall return unto his possession. So this was all talking about the land that they sowed in, and because every man, the way they got their food was by sowing in the land. That's how they got their money. But then there was also houses in the city, where if a man sell a dwelling house in a walled city, okay, now you couldn't make a living off of a house in a walled city. You couldn't make a living off of that. A house was just a place to live in a walled city. So that wouldn't be your possession. Okay, the possession that you have is the land that was given to you according to your tribe and your family. So this is talking about a dwelling house in a walled city. If a man sells his dwelling house inside a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it is sold. Within a year, he may redeem it. And if it is not redeemed within a space of a full year, then the house that is in the walled city shall be established forever to him that bought it. Throughout his generations, it shall go out. It shall not go out in the Jubilee. In other words, the Jubilee would not restore a house within a walled city. Now, that's because that has nothing to do with a man's well-being. This just is a dwelling within a city. You could buy or sell according to how your land performed. Okay, in other words, if you became rich because your land did well, then you could buy a house in the walled city, inside of a walled city. And so that was up for grabs. That could be sold according to what a man had or didn't have. So this was free enterprise once again. And there was a year that was given for a person to be able to redeem a house after he sold it. But after that year, it belonged to the person who bought it. And the Jubilee did not bring it back. It shall not go out in the Jubilee. The Jubilee would not bring that back to the person who originally owned it, because it was in a walled city. It was not something that would bring in a harvest. A house is not going to bring in a harvest. It's a place to live. And man's prosperity was according to his land and what his land's increase would bring him. So verse 31, but the houses of the villages have no wall around them shall be counted as the fields of the country. They may be redeemed, and they shall go out in the Jubilee. Why is that? Because the houses in the villages would be where they lived by their land. When they were working their land, they lived in the houses in the villages. And when they worked their land, that was the house they needed to live in. And those went out in the year of Jubilee. In other words, they would not lose those. Those were part of their possession, because that was with their land. That kind of went with the land, because it's the houses they worked from. They worked their land from. So notwithstanding the cities of the Levites and the houses of the cities of their possession, may the Levites redeem at any time, because the Levites, their work was in the temple. So the Levites were the one exception where they didn't make their money, their living off of the work in the fields. They made their living off the temple. They worked in the temple. That's what the Levites were supposed to do. And if a man purchased of the Levites, then the house that was sold and the city of his possession shall go out in the year of Jubilee. In other words, the Levite would get his house back if he had to sell it. For the houses of the cities of the Levites are their possession among the children of Israel. In other words, the houses were their possession. They didn't have land attributed to them. Their possession was their work in the temple. They were given their temple work as their possession. And they had places where they could live. And those houses were to stay with them, because they had to have a place to live while they were working in the temple. So that would go back to them in the year of Jubilee. But the field of the suburbs of their cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession. So if we look at the NIV of this, it makes a little bit more sense. It says, but the pasture land belonging to their towns must not be sold. It is their permanent possession. So their towns had to have pasture land, and that is permanent for the Levites. This is talking about the Levites. So it's interesting. We can go into this further into Leviticus 25, but I wanted to go that far because it kind of shows how fair God is, how God was like not wanting what has happened in the United States. He didn't want that to happen to the Israelites, where the rich people bought up all the land and like the banks own so much of the land in the United States. The banks are basically, they own those lands, and they're you have to pay off those lands to the bank, the property. And even after that, it belongs to the government. And the government, if you don't pay taxes, they can take that land from you. So that land in the United States even is not the way it's supposed to be. The United States was not meant to be that way, where could be taken away if there was no taxes. The whole idea of land tax was not something that our founders originally thought of. That's something that came into existence because of corrupt government and corrupt laws that were not part of our Constitution. Anyways, this kind of shows the fairness of God, how the Jubilee year, the 50th year, was something that evened out the scorecard. It made everybody everyone was basically on the same playing field. The people who were rich could not hold it over the heads of other people. People had an opportunity to make something of their lives and to work their land and to receive the blessing if they would obey the Lord and live in his blessing. Now, another interesting factor about the year of Jubilee is that we can see where the years of Jubilee are right now. We can see as plain as day when the Jubilees are occurring for Israel. They are still happening because the Israelites have still been in their land, even though the land hasn't been theirs. They haven't had their own nation. They've been in their land. There's been Israelites living in Israel for a while now. The Ottoman Empire ruled in the land of Israel for 1517 until 1917. In 1917, December 11th, Great Britain, General Allenby marched into Jerusalem, and they basically freed Israel from Ottoman rulership. And the Ottoman Empire ruled for 400 years over the land of Israel and over Jerusalem. And basically that was 1917 is when that happened. They were freed from the oppression of the Ottoman Empire. And then we see that in 1967 came the Six-Day War, and Israel got all their land back when they were attacked by the surrounding nations, the surrounding Muslim nations. They attacked Israel. And the funny thing is, Israel defended itself, and they even took back land. They didn't just defend their territory that they had already, that was given to them in 1948, but they actually expanded and got Jerusalem back. And they actually expanded beyond the land they had originally been given in 1948 when they were declared a nation. So it's interesting that was exactly 50 years after 1917 to 1967. That's 50 years. That's 50-year period. And that's when they got all their land back, and they got Jerusalem back. And of course, we know that 1967, that year, is also 2,500 years after Daniel prophesied it, after the angel prophesied it to Daniel, I should say. It was exactly a times and a half time, 2,500 years. So it's also interesting that that's a 50-year period since the Israelites were set free from the Ottoman Empire in 1917. Well, then along came 2017. What happened in 2017? On December 6th of 2017, Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That's a huge deal because internationally, that was not being done. No one was recognizing Israel's capital as being Jerusalem. That happened in the Jubilee year of 2017. So we see that the Jubilees are pretty obvious because they're huge events that happened 50 years apart, exactly 50 years apart. 2017, 1967, 1917. So we can tell when the Jubilees are. We can see that this is for the land. This is not just for the Jews or the Israelites themselves. This is for the land. They got the land back in 1967. They recovered all their land. In 1967, which was after the land was taken from the Ottoman Empire. They were freed from the Ottoman Empire, and the British took control of it in 1917. And the end result of that was 1948. They were given the status of being their own nation. And the Jubilees are obviously happening for the land even now. In 2017 was the last Jubilee of the land. So that's kind of my overview of the Year of Jubilee. So thanks for watching.